October 1943, over Rabaul, Japanese ace. Saburo Sakai heard the chilling wail, what his radio operator called Akuma no Fue, the devil's whistle, just seconds before an F4U Corsair tore through his squadron, disintegrating a Zero in a spray of gunfire. The Allies called it engineering. Japanese intelligence called it a threat so severe their pilots begged not to face it in final missions. This is the shocking truth behind the F4U Corsair that Japanese pilots called the whistling death. Why did Japan's best aviators, who ruled the skies with 471 kills in 3 months, suddenly fear one American fighter more than all others, so much that it forced a rewriting of tactics, technology, and even the psychology of war? To answer that, we have to start with the myth of zero supremacy, and the moment cracks first began to appear. Japanese naval aviators entered the Pacific War convinced of their own invincibility. In the first 3 months after Pearl Harbor, Zero squadrons claimed 471 enemy aircraft destroyed, a number that cemented their reputation as masters of the sky. The Zero's dominance was no accident. Every pilot who strapped into one had survived a training regimen known for brutality and selectiveness. Saburo Sakai's own class began with over 1,500 applicants and graduated just 25. The result was a cadre of pilots who believed, with good reason, that no Allied opponent could match their skill or their machine. The Zero's design philosophy reflected this confidence. It sacrificed armor and self-sealing fuel tanks for agility and range, trusting the pilot's hands to keep the aircraft alive. This approach paid off in the hands of men like Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, whose flying was so precise that fellow pilots called him the god of the Zero. Their doctrine revolved around the shotai, a 3-plane formation with a leader far ahead and 2 wingmen weaving behind, covering a wide swath of sky. Without radios, they relied on keen vision and instinct, weaving and rolling to protect each other and press the attack. In combat, each shotai attacked in succession, maintaining relentless pressure on enemy formations. The leader would strike first, then climb away as his wingmen dove in, keeping opponents off balance and under constant threat. When attacked, the loose spacing allowed the formation to break apart and regroup, making it nearly impossible for Allied pilots to catch more than one Zero at a time. This system rewarded initiative and teamwork. Japanese pilots learned to anticipate each other's moves, trusting that their wingmen would be ready to cover their blind spots or pounce on a distracted enemy. In the chaos of battle, this discipline made them seem untouchable. American pilots flying heavier, slower Wildcats or P-40s often found themselves outmaneuvered and outgunned. The standing order for any Allied pilot was clear: never dogfight a Zero. If forced into a turning fight, the outcome was almost always fatal. The myth of Zero supremacy was reinforced by the numbers. In the first year of war, kill ratios routinely exceeded 10-1 in favor of Japanese pilots. Every victory fed to the legend. The Zero became more than a machine. It was a symbol of national pride and martial spirit. Its silhouette and rising sun insignia, inspiring awe among Japanese and dread among their enemies. Sakai, Nishizawa, and their peers wore their ace status as a badge of honor, each tally a testament to the superiority of their training and their aircraft. Yet beneath the surface, cracks had begun to form. Allied intelligence underestimated the Zero's weaknesses, and Japanese command grew complacent, convinced that aggressive tactics and pilot skill would always prevail. Pilots returning from combat brought back tales of new enemy tactics and unfamiliar aircraft, but these reports were often dismissed. For now, the Zero's reign seemed absolute. The sky belonged to Japan, and its pilots believed nothing could challenge their myth of invincibility. Japanese naval intelligence officers in early 1943 faced a puzzle they believed they had already solved. Reports from Rabaul and the Solomons described a new American fighter with a bent wing, faster and more durable than anything previously encountered. Yet, in Tokyo, the technical analysis branch filed these sightings under existing categories, mislabeling the aircraft as a variant of the F6F Hellcat, or, in some documents, as a Type II land strike fighter. This designation, rooted in the imperial year system, reflected the assumption that the new model was merely another incremental improvement, not a leap forward. The logic seemed sound. American fighters had always prioritized ruggedness over performance, and early carrier trials for the bent-winged machine had ended with embarrassing crashes into the sea. Intelligence summaries concluded it was a limited-use ground support aircraft, unsuited for true air superiority. Field officers, however, sent increasingly urgent cables. Reports from the 253rd Kokutai described the aircraft's ability to absorb heavy damage and still climb away from the fight. Pilots noted the distinctive whistle as it dove through formations, a sound that preceded the destruction of several veteran aviators in single short bursts. Still, headquarters clung to their initial assessment. The intelligence division's technical diagrams, based on partial wreckage and distant sightings, focused on the unfamiliar inverted gull-wing. Analysts speculated this was an unnecessary complication, perhaps a manufacturing shortcut, not an engineering breakthrough. Captured American manuals and components filtered through the technical research institutes at Tachikawa and Yokosuka. Teams compared the new fighter's dimensions to the Hellcat and P-40, searching for familiar patterns. The presence of fabric on the Corsair's outer wings and the lack of obvious armor led to further underestimation. One internal memo, later recovered by Allied intelligence, summarized, "The Type II land strike fighter is neither agile nor suited for carrier use. Its operational impact is expected to be minimal." This blind spot persisted for months. Even as field units began requesting additional escorts for bomber runs and reporting alarming losses, Central Command continued to allocate resources based on outdated threat models. The intelligence branch's confidence in their own methodology created a lag that proved costly. Only after repeated defeats and the recovery of more complete wreckage did the technical staff recognize the true nature of the Corsair's design. By then, the aircraft's reputation among Japanese pilots had already shifted from curiosity to dread, and the intelligence community faced the difficult task of revising their assessments in the wake of mounting losses. The consequences of this initial misreading would ripple through every level of Japanese air strategy, exposing the limits of doctrinal certainty in the face of rapid technological change. The arrival of the F4U Corsair in the Pacific marked a new era in aerial combat, defined by raw power and the ability to dictate the fight from the opening moment. At the heart of this transformation was the Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine, a 2,000 horsepower, 18-cylinder radial that delivered nearly double the output of the Zero's Nakajima Sakai. This engine alone weighed as much as an entire Japanese fighter, yet it propelled the Corsair to speeds no Japanese pilot had ever seen. In level flight, the Corsair could reach 446 miles per hour, while the Zero struggled to break 350. The difference was not just in top speed, but in how quickly a pilot could climb, accelerate, and escape. Japanese aviators trained to attack in tight formations and rely on the turn to win found themselves outpaced in every vertical maneuver. Where the Zero's climb rate had once been a source of pride, allowing pilots to spiral above and pounce on slower American planes, the Corsair's sheer power flipped the script. It could outclimb the Zero at over 3,000 feet per minute, and with a flick of the throttle, surge away from danger. In a dive, the Corsair's mass and strength allowed it to reach speeds over 450 miles per hour, a regime where the Zero's airframe risked catastrophic failure. The tactical implications were immediate and profound. For the first time, American pilots could use energy tactics, fighting with speed and altitude as their shield. The Corsair could enter a fight from above, strike with overwhelming force, then climb away before Japanese pilots could react. Japanese formations, so effective at trapping slower opponents, now found themselves unable to catch or corner the new threat. Saburo Sakai, who had spent years dominating the skies, described the shock of seeing a Corsair rocket past his canopy and vanish into the clouds, leaving his Zero powerless to follow. This new dynamic forced Japanese pilots into a defensive posture. Their doctrine, built around outmaneuvering and outlasting the enemy, offered no answer for an opponent who could choose when and where to engage. The Corsair's power plant did more than just move metal. It shattered the psychological advantage Japanese aviators had held since the war began. Reports from the front lines described the frustration of seeing American fighters dive through a formation, unleash a burst of gunfire, and climb away untouched, repeating the process at will, immune to pursuit. American pilots quickly learned to exploit this dominance. They avoided turning fights, instead using slashing attacks and vertical maneuvers that played to the Corsair's strengths. The result was a new kind of air combat, one where speed and energy replaced the slow, spiraling dogfights of the past. The R2800 engine made this possible, giving every Corsair pilot the confidence to attack, disengage, and return for another strike on their own terms. For Japanese airmen, the realization came hard. The era when skill and teamwork could compensate for technical limits was over. The sky now belonged to the pilot who could climb faster, dive steeper, and control the fight from start to finish. Vort's design team faced a challenge that set the Corsair apart from every other Allied fighter: how to harness the full power of the R2800 double Wasp engine without sacrificing the ruggedness needed for carrier landings. The answer lay in a wing shape that at first glance seemed almost whimsical, a sharply bent, inverted gull-wing that dropped steeply from the fuselage before rising again at the tips. This was not a stylistic flourish. The downward angle at the wing root allowed the engineers to mount a 13-foot, 4-inch propeller, the largest ever fitted to a single-engine fighter, while keeping the landing gear short and strong enough to survive the jarring impacts of carrier operations. Shorter gear meant less flex, fewer collapses, and a more reliable return to the deck after every mission. But the wing's shape did more than just solve a mechanical puzzle. The geometry minimized the aerodynamic drag that typically plagued large radial engine fighters, especially at high speeds. Wind tunnel tests showed that the inverted gull configuration reduced interference where the wing joined the fuselage, giving the Corsair a cleaner airflow profile, and a crucial edge in both speed and fuel efficiency. Every square inch of the design was a negotiation between brute force and finesse, and the bent wing was the signature of that compromise. The Corsair's distinctive whistle, the sound that haunted Japanese pilots from Rabaul to Okinawa, emerged directly from this engineering ingenuity. Air entering the oil cooler ducts, which were positioned at the bend of each wing root, rushed through narrow passages at high velocity. In a steep dive, the airflow hit resonant frequencies, producing a high-pitched, banshee-like wail that carried for miles. Engineers at Vought had not planned for this acoustic signature, but it became a calling card, one that Japanese ground crews and pilots learned to recognize with dread. The whistle was most pronounced when the Corsair attacked at over 400 miles per hour, a speed unreachable by any Zero. In the chaos of battle, the sound alone was enough to send formations scattering, sometimes before a single shot was fired. Japanese intelligence teams, examining wrecked Corsairs and poring over aerodynamic charts, struggled to understand the logic behind the bent wing. Their reports noted the unusual oil cooler placements and the complex ducting that snaked through the wing roots. One analyst concluded, with a mix of frustration and reluctant admiration, that the inverted gull-wing configuration provides aerodynamic advantages we cannot replicate. Attempts to mimic the airflow management in Japanese designs faltered, hampered by shortages of high-grade aluminum and the absence of large-scale spot welding techniques. The Corsair's sound remained unique, a product of American engineering priorities, industrial resources, and a willingness to accept complexity in pursuit of performance. For Japanese pilots, the whistle became a psychological trigger. Veteran ace Hiroshi Nishizawa wrote in his diary, "When we hear the whistle, we know death approaches from above." The bent wing, once dismissed as a curiosity, had become a symbol of an enemy that could strike without warning and vanish before the Zeros could react. In every technical detail, from the oil cooler's placement to the precise angle of the wing root, the Corsair's design delivered not just speed and survivability, but a new kind of psychological warfare carried on the wind. Gun camera footage from the Black Sheep Squadron shows the brutal truth of air combat over Bougainville. 6.50 caliber Brownings, all mounted in the Corsair's wings, could unleash 7,000 rounds per minute. In those fleeting seconds, a single burst was often enough to tear a Zero in half. The concentrated firepower left little room for error. Marine pilots, many barely in their 20s, learned to fire in 2-second bursts, just long enough to turn a pursuing enemy into a plume of smoke, but not so long as to waste precious ammunition. The result was decisive. In the hands of VEM F214 and VEM F223, the Corsair became a weapon of attrition. Japanese pilots who once relied on the Zero's agility and tight formations found themselves outgunned at every turn. The lack of armor and self-sealing fuel tanks in their own aircraft meant that a single hit from the Corsair's guns often set their planes ablaze. Reports from Rabaul describe entire Shotai formations vanishing in minutes. The kill ratio tells the story. For every Corsair lost in air-to-air combat, 11 Japanese aircraft went down. Some squadrons returned from missions without a scratch, while Japanese ground crews counted empty bunks and missing names. American pilots, once told never to dogfight a Zero, now pressed attacks with growing confidence. The psychological toll was immediate. Japanese aviators began to fear not just the Corsair's speed, but the certainty of its fire. kamikaze pilots wrote in their diaries that they prayed not to meet the whistling demons on their final flights. By late 1943, the myth of invincibility had been shattered, one short lethal burst at a time. Kamikaze pilots entered their final missions carrying more than the weight of their orders. By late 1944, the sound of a Corsair's whistle over the horizon had become a warning that few dared to ignore. Squadron diaries from the 701st Shinbutai reveal that on mornings when Corsair patrols were reported near the target area, pilots gathered in silence, some quietly requesting to be reassigned to maintenance duties or reporting sudden illness. Official doctrine demanded unwavering resolve, but reality on the ground told a different story. Mission commanders, faced with mounting losses, began issuing contingency instructions. If Corsair presence was confirmed overhead, pilots were authorized to abort and return or divert to secondary targets. These were not isolated incidents, debriefing logs from the 72nd Sentai detail, multiple sorties where entire waves of aircraft never reached their intended objectives, breaking off at the first sign of the whistling demons. In the margins of a kamikaze pilot's notebook recovered at Kanoya, a single line appears again and again. We pray not to encounter the whistling demons during our final mission. The fear was not of death itself. These men had already accepted that fate, but of dying without honor, shot down before they could complete their duty. Some pilots confessed in post-war interviews that hearing the Corsairs approach was the only time they hesitated to follow through. Reports from Air Defense Command noted a spike in mission aborts whenever Corsair squadrons were active, forcing planners to reroute attacks or delay launches until the American fighters had moved on. Over time, the psychological burden grew heavier than any technical disadvantage. The certainty that a single, unseen adversary could decide the outcome of a mission before a shot was fired eroded the core of Japan's kamikaze effort. For many, the whistle in the sky became the sound of a war already lost. By late 1944, Japanese intelligence reports documented a staggering 11-to-1 kill ratio in favor of Corsair pilots. Declassified diaries and debriefings confirm that the F4U's unique whistle, generated by its inverted gull-wing and oil cooler inlets, became a signal of imminent destruction to Japanese aviators. Kamikaze pilots openly confessed greater fear of Corsair interception than anti-aircraft fire. And factory records show rushed, unsuccessful attempts to copy its design. Yet the full content of many Japanese intelligence files on captured Corsairs remains classified, leaving unanswered how deeply their command understood the magnitude of the threat. What is clear, the Corsairs' blend of firepower, speed, and psychological impact forced a shift in Japanese air strategy and marked the end of zero supremacy. Today, the lessons of technological overmatch and the power of psychological warfare remain central to air combat doctrine. As one captured Japanese report concluded, against the whistling fighter, our options are limited.